Well, welcome. We'll get started here right on time at 5 o'clock, just because we got a lot to go through. As you're coming in, and those who are already in, if you want to rename yourself to where you're calling in from, I think that can be kind of fun. So just like I had done there. And if you want to do that and you're using Zoom and not a phone, you just go into participants, find your name, go to more, and then you can hit rename yourself. So that's just kind of a fun little thing. Awesome. Cool, we got some Michigan, Maine, all over the place, and I'm coming here from Houston. Okay, well, it's right about 4:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone, both the Hearst employees, Hearst newspaper employees, and the members of the Military Veterans and Journalism organization for coming and doing this workshop with us. We're incredibly excited to host this for you. Basically, the intent of the workshop is to give you a little bit of a sneak behind what's going on in Hearst newspapers and what's a newsroom like, and then also to provide you a chance to ask questions and a chance to network. This is all going to be done in an hour and a half, so it's going to be quick. So feel free to take notes, but it will be recorded. So if people don't have a chance to talk or look at it right now, you can always come back to it. But we're all very excited to have you all here. And if you're coming in now, feel free to change your name through the renaming it to where you're calling in from, and we'll go ahead and get started. Before we do that, I'm going to hand it off to Zach just to say a couple words, and we'll get right into the content. Zach, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who is dialing in from Hearst. Really appreciate it. We founded Military Veterans and Journalism to support veterans who are looking to bolster their careers and just get into the work of journalism. I think this goes right to the crux of it, getting to know and connect with other journalists, people who are doing the journalism across our nation. And we are so grateful for everybody taking the time today to be here. And it's an incredible learning opportunity for everybody. So, hey, thank you very much. And I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Zach. And just because I realized I hadn't done an introduction here. So my name's Levi Shepard, and I'm an HR program manager here, and I manage a bunch of different things at Hearst newspapers. But one of the things that I've been working on is developing workshops such as this and looking at how we can deepen our relationships with different groups like military veterans. So I'm just excited to be able to provide this to you all. So in terms of what we're looking at doing and covering today, found my mouse here. So we're going to talk through the future of the newsroom. We're going to talk about our fellowship program, talk about investigations, talk about what the experience of transitioning from a veteran into journalism and kind of what that looks like, talk about photojournalism, and then we'll end with a Q&A and a networking session. So we'll get a lot covered, but I think it's going to be really valuable for you all. Okay, so the first thing I do want to give you is a little bit of an overview of the organization. So I'm going to hand it off to Mike just to talk about what Hearst Newspapers is all about and kind of where he sees it going. So Mike, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Levi, and thank you all for attending today. Again, my name is Mike DeLuca. I'm the president and publisher of the Hearst Connecticut Media Group. I'll do a quick commercial for the Hearst Connecticut Media Group. We've got eight dailies, 15 weeklies, 2 magazines. So we're spread out. We've got a ton of great products. We have incredible journalism. And, I think everyone on this call would say at Hearst, it begins and ends with journalism. The business is great, and that's what we got to do to pay the bills. But at the end of the day, what we do is a service to our country and, to the greater good, I think. And so not to sound too corny, but that's how I feel about it. It is an honor to be here and have you guys attending today, especially coming off Memorial Day. I'm truly honored, and I'm sure my colleagues are truly honored to be able to speak to you guys today. And first, just to thank you. for all that you do for our country. Who knows what the state of journalism would be? Who knows what the state of free speech would be without what you guys do and have done in your lives? So sincere thank you from everybody at Hearst, who I know really respects everything that you do. In terms of who we are, so Hearst Newspapers, we're a division of Hearst, which, if you don't know the name Hearst, Hearst is an iconic company. You may not know Hearst, but you probably know a lot of the brands. You're probably very familiar with ESPN. You're probably very familiar with, Cosmopolitan or Esquire or Car and Driver, or the list goes on and on. It's a wonderful company. Is founded on the backs of newspapers. 1887, William Randolph Hearst was the president and publisher of the San Francisco Examiner, which then, acquired the San Francisco Chronicle and became the mega newspaper of that generation. That has lived on 135 years or something like that later, and we're still going strong. And Hearst really, really believes in the First Amendment and really believes in what we are doing, which is fantastic for all of us in this business, because, as you know, the newspaper business is going through a transition. Yes, we are newspapers. I like to talk about us being more of a media company. I know in Connecticut, we talk about us being media company. Because sure, we have products and we have newspapers and we have magazines and things like that, but we have the huge digital footprint, which is what our future is. And so we kind of think of ourselves as an all-encompassing media company that serves, young, old, middle, whatever it might be. As you also see outside of Connecticut, we've got, what we call the Big Five. This is San Francisco, Houston, Connecticut, Albany, and San Antonio. But in addition to that, we've got community newspapers across Illinois, throughout Texas. And so it spans the country. We employ over 700 journalists, 400 salespeople, 200 marketers. And working for Hearst is just a fantastic opportunity. It is family owned to this day. And although we are huge, we are still treated, I think everybody in this organization feels like we're treated like family and treated incredibly well. And one day I can maybe tell you stories about how Hearst stepped up to the plate during the pandemic, but it was just unbelievable, starting with, a mandate that there would be no hiring freezes or furloughs or people losing their jobs, which was incredibly important for, those of us with families and, people with, needs that they needed their livelihood. So the other thing I'll just say about us is it's a meritocracy. There's opportunities that will always arise. Wendy, who you're going to hear from next, is our editor-in-chief in Connecticut, and she and I spend most of our conversations talking about the development of our people and who's ready for what, and what are the new roles that we can create as we expand, and how do we, evolve people and their skill sets to do bigger and better things. And so, in my 27 years in the workforce, Hearst has been by far the best place that I've ever worked. I bleed the blue of Hearst, and I would be really, really honored to have more of our military veterans as part of our organization. I don't know if I said it up front, but I'm the son of a U.S. Marine. I will also tell you, I read some of the questions, the pre-questions that we might be answering later on today. And I can tell you to get ahead, you already have a leg up if you want to work in Connecticut, because I know Wendy's, I don't want to steal her thunder, but she's the spouse of a veteran. I'm the son of a veteran. And I would say you've got a good leg up if you send your resume to us. So with that, let me throw it back to Levi, who's going to introduce, a variety of wonderful journalists across our organization. And so, Levi, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that introduction. We'll go ahead and bring it over to Wendy to talk about the future of the newsroom, and we'll keep this going. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so as Mike mentioned, I'm the VP of Content and Editor-in-Chief in Connecticut. So pleased to be here. We absolutely threw our hands up as soon as we heard about the organization and the fact that you wanted to learn more about us. We want to learn more about you. This is personal and professional for us. As Mike said, you know, my husband did 22 years of service before retiring and now air traffic controlling little children instead of planes. But he's very busy, I can assure you. But we care very much about the interest that has been shared with us amongst your group and also the wider network. And our intention here today is to share with you a little insight into what the newsrooms are doing, what a newsroom of today looks like, but also the future. And as you know, journalism is a changing landscape every single day. You know, whether it's a new story or new technology, we have to really be on the edge of our seats and ready and prepared to do something differently and to take on new challenges with excitement and brevity. And that's something that we'll detail today. And I think for all of you, a lot of the questions that we'll get to in the Q&A are like, how do I get my start here? And my best advice would be, don't be daunted, you know, start somewhere. You've got networks available to you today more than ever, social media, blogs, writing pieces, pitching freelance, that kind of thing. And I think that Hearst is just a great company for offering everything from fellowship opportunities to, you know, full-time jobs, which Mike referenced. We have 13 currently open at Hearst, Connecticut alone. So we have a very talented group of people here today who will talk you through everything from the investigations. We even have a fellow joining us if you want to know how she got her start and things like that. Before we get there and I pass the torch to the next speaker, I can tell you that it always starts with quality journalism, the integrity of the journalism, and, you know, presenting a very balanced and fair view in the work that we do. But that quality is absolutely key to what we do and the success that we are seeing at Hearst, Connecticut. And throughout the Hearst newspaper division. From there, you'll know that digital is absolutely fundamental to the reach that we have, you know, really grown in recent years. And I think data is an important part of the job now, you know, to inform the journalism. You know, what is the audience engaging with? How can we get more educated around the retention of our loyal readers, but also how to find new readers? And I think that's something we can talk about. I know that we are also making great strides in some of the diversification of the reporting that we're doing, but also the diversity within our own newsrooms. And, you know, that's why we're very interested to spend time creating new pipelines and networks so that you get to know us a little bit better and that you want to apply for jobs in our newsrooms. And likewise, we get to know you, and maybe it's not an opportunity today, but it could be one of tomorrow. And I think that the other key that we're hoping to achieve today is, you know, I believe strongly that we have a role in the industry to share the knowledge that we have and really build out a future for journalism. And part of that is the outreach that we're doing. So, you know, sit back and enjoy. Feel free to ask any questions you have, but we're happy to be here and look forward to the discussion over the next hour or so.
Thanks so much, Wendy. So now we're going to talk about, she had mentioned it, but our fellowship program. So Maria is the managing editor in Houston, and we have a former fellow, Gwen Wu. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thanks, Levi. Hi, my name is Maria Reeve. I'm the managing editor for content here in Houston, and welcome to today, and thank you again for your service. I wanted to talk a little bit about our fellowship program and then toss it to Gwen Wu, one of our all-star fellows, so she can talk a little bit about her experience. But the program started roughly about 22 years ago, and it was an effort to recruit, train, and support talented emerging journalists. And so since then, dozens, I'd say almost 100 people have gone through our program. Many of them remain in Hearst. And they have found their career paths with us. And so for that, we're pretty excited. The program is, you know, we look for journalists, usually emerging, but sometimes later in their careers. And so it's a 2-year rotation. We bring in folks and they start at one of the papers, either in San Antonio, Houston, San Francisco, the Connecticut Media Group, or Albany. And then after 12 months there, they switch. They go to another paper so they can broaden their experiences, go to another part of the country, work with another group of editors, so that their skills are being built and honed through each of their rotations. And we like to hire out of that group. I think in our last group of fellows, we hired, I think, all of them, with the exception of maybe one. And so the idea is that we find this talent, we develop this talent, and we keep this talent so that it can, these journalists can serve in our communities and at our properties. It's a fairly rigorous process. They have a writing test and then an interview with editors of these properties, and then we choose. So in this last group, I think we had more than 200, and we got down to 6. So fairly competitive, but we think we've got a great group of journalists, a diverse group of journalists, and that all goes towards the aim of the program. And the skills that we are looking for, like Wendy mentioned, our newsrooms are all focused on how we can grow our audiences. So we're looking for reporters and other, we have data analysts and other skill sets that help us towards those goals. So that's kind of a broad overview, but now, like I said, I'll toss it to Gwen, who was a former fellow and is now here in Houston with me. Gwen?
Great. Thanks so much, Maria. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. I guess I'll jump a little bit into kind of what I did during the fellowship and talk a little bit about kind of why I believe so strongly in it that I still constantly try to talk up the fellowship to people now, even that having been hired full time. So in 2018, I started as a Hearst Fellow at the San Francisco Chronicle. 2 of my former colleagues, Tim O'Rourke and Carlos Avila Gonzalez, are here with me too. But I started there as a breaking news reporter covering crime, anything mayhem related, and sometimes a little bit of Chinatown and Asian American communities for the Metro section of the newspaper. And, you know, I had a very traditional kind of background in some ways. You know, I was straight out of college when I started the fellowship, but I had just about no educational experience related to journalism. So this was really my training ground to learn about how journalism works in a real life newsroom. It was the biggest newsroom I'd worked in at the time. And it really gave me a lot of very valuable skills. During my time as a fellow, never once did I feel like I was just kind of the intern hanging around waiting for someone to hand me a story, or, you know, the person who was forced to go get coffee for everybody else. You know, really, I got a lot of experience as a fellow, just feeling like I was part of the staff. You know, I had editors who were treating me like I had the competency to write really big stories, to report on really major events. I got some great experience my first year covering breaking news in such a major city like San Francisco. And eventually I walked away with a good handful of stories that were both, you know, of my own pitching, but also of big events that my editors entrusted me to cover correctly. My second year of the fellowship, I was moved over to the Houston Chronicle, where I started as on the business desk as the Houston how-to reporter, which we kind of termed as a mix of consumer reporting and smarter living by the New York Times, all wrapped up in a very local Houston package. So did that for a little while. And then in January of 2020, I started to fill in as the business of healthcare reporter after one of our reporters moved up to the investigations team. Let me just say, choosing to be a healthcare reporter 2 months before a pandemic happens might want to get a crystal ball next time to avoid that one. But it was a really great experience. And again, you know, I was really fortunate to have editors who trusted me with the gigantic responsibility of covering healthcare during a pandemic. And eventually, you know, I switched over to covering COVID-19 full time for the Chronicle, and that's still what I'm doing today. overall, all of the fellows who were in my cohort with me kind of span a very wide range of experiences. We have a lot of folks who are people of color, who are women, who are LGBTQ, who come through the fellowship. We really all felt like it was a really great place to get a foot in the door in journalism. Eventually most of us got hired. Other folks might have left because they wanted to be closer to family, or, might have seen just kind of a dream job they couldn't pass up. But, for the most part, a lot of us really felt like we had found a home within Hearst to do good reporting, to do the kinds of stuff that, otherwise, in another place, people might be saying like, hey, you just don't have the experience yet to do that. But we had a lot of editors who believe very strongly in the Hearst Fellowship Program and are willing to give us opportunities to do what we want to be doing in the newsroom. Like Maria and Wendy have mentioned, I really feel like, my apologies, my pit bull is deciding right now, sometimes he wants to throw a tantrum on camera. But, we really feel like, all of our editors had given us, these tools, these trainings, and worked directly one-on-one with us to help us develop, quality journalism skills. I would say that as somebody who joined with, very little prior newsroom experience, and the experience I did wasn't quite traditional journalism, I really felt like I gained a lot of skills in breaking news, in doing business reporting, in narrative reporting, and even investigative reporting. And, that has been a big part of why I've decided to stay with Hearst at this point in my career. So yeah, I've always had a lot of great peers to mentor me, always been working in these really wonderful, diverse communities where people are curious about you and want to befriend you just as much as they want to work with you and help you develop your skills. So been a big proponent since, and it definitely is great, ending up at a paper like the Houston Chronicle for me, just being able to experience what it's like to cover such major news stories in such a big metropolitan area. All right, so I think that's pretty much it for me. Levi, if you want to take the Zoom mic back, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. That was great to hear from both of you on the fellowship program. And if you get a chance to talk to them later, you can ask more questions, but a lot of people have experience around that, so they can answer some of those questions around that. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. We're going to talk about investigative journalism. So I'm joined here with Brendan Loynes. He's a managing editor of investigations at the Albany Times-Union. Welcome, Brendan, and I'll hand it off to you.
Sure, happy to be here. So in a nutshell, my background is that I have worked for the Hearst Corporation and the Albany Times-Union since 1998. I grew up the son of a newspaper publisher. He had come up through the advertising side of the business, and on weekends used to allow me to accompany him sometimes when I was a boy to go to his office, and I used to gravitate to the newsroom, and the reporters who worked there and the jobs that they did, it fascinated me. And I, back then, of course, they were using typewriters and clutching cigarettes in their teeth in the newsroom. Times have changed, but I got into this field, after college, and I have tried various beats. I've covered almost every beat at a newspaper can have, but I finally knew that the role for me, I enjoy investigative journalism. It's what makes me tick. It gets me, to work every day, and I can't wait to get to work to do some of the work we did. And the wonderful thing about the Hearst Corporation is that they have, while other newsrooms across the country are sadly cutting their workforces, the Hearst Corporation has invested greatly in its investigative programs. Even recently, we created a new 2-year investigative fellowship. A young lady that works on my team and is going to immerse herself exclusively in investigative journalism. We also, with our Connecticut partners, have created a data team that is at the top of their list is to do investigative work as well, that at both the state, the local, the federal level. And, in that regard, the thing about investigative journalism is that when you think about it, if we're not there, who else would be? I don't know that we can trust our government agencies anymore, or our elected politicians, to be the watchdog of public officials and public corruption in the country. And so there was, as Levi has put up a couple headlines from a series of stories. It was one of the first, if you will, national stage investigations I was able to be involved in about 20 years ago at the Times-Union, where I was connected with two pharmacists who worked at a Veterans Affairs hospital in Albany. And these pharmacists had for years been warning the Office of Inspector General for the VA and also the VA and the FBI that there was corruption in their cancer research program. Drug companies were funding tests and study programs at VA hospitals. And what was happening was that there was corrupt researchers in this hospital who were falsifying records and pushing veterans into cancer programs for which they should never have been enrolled in. At least 5 of them died and dozens more suffered because of it. And how the VA responded was that they fired both the pharmacists. They were aware of it because they were the ones prescribing the research drugs, or not prescribing them, but dispensing them. And ultimately, one of them was transferred to an empty floor of the hospital and given a desk with no phone and no computer and told that that was his new workstation. This was in the late 90s, if you can believe it or not. And ultimately, our stories, uncovered all of this that had been going on and the cover up that ensued by the Office of Inspector General. And it led to these guys eventually being hailed as heroes. They became the grand marshals of the Memorial Day Parade in Albany, which was a great thing to see for these two pharmacists who had suffered so much for trying to sound the alarm. And they also, Congress finally, a few years later, introduced legislation to to create an independent oversight office to keep tabs on medical research problems or programs at VA hospitals nationwide. And that in and of itself was the sort of outcome that you hope for with investigative journalism, that your work, is consequential and that things are changed and that lives may be saved as a result of some of the reporting. These days in New York, we are focused on our governor, who, believe it or not, it turns out may not be the best governor in America. But I would say this, that and I think you as veterans realize this too, that investigative journalism, especially on a national level and overseas, to get to the truth, to seek the truth, and to help explain to people the issues that are important to them and where government, is doing things wrong, especially including in the military and across the board, and also when they're doing it right. But I will say that it's reassuring to me, and it's made me want to stay with the Hearst Corporation because of how invested they are in investigative journalism and in making a difference in the communities that we cover.
Awesome. Do you want to share a little bit more of kind of some of the challenges that you face as an investigative journalist?
Yeah, sure, Levi. And that's, one of the things that we face today, the biggest challenge is that, look at these pharmacists. It took me the longest time to get them in the door to meet with us and to feel safe doing that. They came at 9 o'clock at night to the newspaper. It was the only time they would agree to come. And we stayed there talking until I think like 2 o'clock in the morning. And that has become a symptom of what's wrong, in that the whistleblowers no longer feel safe talking to us. And I have seen government agencies and even private companies that will try to find out who the leak, instead of fixing the problem, they focus on finding and identifying the whistleblowers, the people who talk to us, and punishing them. And I've seen it in the state of New York. We did a series here once on issues in the parole system, where parolees who were violating curfews and committing crimes were being pushed back on the street by supervisors who were told by New York officials they wanted to keep prison recidivism numbers lower. And so luckily, the sources for that story, we met, and then from that day forward, we always communicated with one of us on either a payphone when they had them, or I would go to a hotel down the street from the newspaper and call them from a house phone. And it turned out that the Division of Parole used subpoenas and went after these whistleblowers who had, some of them had testified in front of the state legislature, and they ended up using that witness list to then go after their cell phone records, even the cell phone records of their wives. And you know, so that's what it's become now, is that government oftentimes wants to punish the whistleblowers. So it's become harder for us to get people to feel safe to talk to us. And it's very challenging.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely found that really fascinating to kind of hear the investigative journalism side of things. And it sounds like we have somebody who's in the fellowship for that right now. So hopefully you two can connect. We're going to go ahead and move on to kind of what that transition between being a veteran was and what that looks like now. So I'm going to introduce you to Chris Tomlinson, and he'll talk about a little bit of his current reporting and kind of that experience. But Chris is a columnist here at the Houston Chronicle, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Levi. So as Levi said, I'm a veteran. I served in the Army from 1983 to 1990, which is 3 or 4 lifetimes ago. I was enlisted E5, signals intelligence collector, analyst. I wrote intelligence reports. I guess that's a nascent form of journalism. And you know, I got out at the end of the Cold War. I was a Soviet specialist, and there really wasn't anything left for me. I got my degree from the University of Texas at Austin, and kind of missed being overseas. I didn't study journalism. I flew to South Africa, where apartheid was coming to an end. And one thing led to another, and I ended up working for a Japanese newspaper called Asahi Shimbun. And from that led to me basically getting pegged as a conflict reporter. I covered violence in the townships, and you know, kind of made my living getting shot at for a while. I went to Rwanda, covered the end of the genocide and the rise of an insurgency, civil wars in Uganda and Congo for the Associated Press. And you know, I think that's one of the ways I was able to break into the industry. I spent 20 years at the AP before joining Hearst. I'm now a columnist on the business page. I write about economics, energy, policy. And after 20 years of being paid not to have an opinion, I'm now paid to have one, and no one can shut me up. And, you know, I want to talk a little bit about how difficult it really is as a veteran, and particularly as someone without a journalism degree, to kind of prove to that hiring manager that, you know, that you have something special, that you have a skill that, you know, the paper is going to want. Because I used to be an Associated Press bureau chief. I've hired and fired people in my career. And I can tell you that, you know, the one thing that any manager, that any boss is really looking for is quality product. And often a quality product of a particular type. In my case, I was an intelligence gatherer. I was comfortable on battlefields. I was comfortable around people with guns, and that was kind of my my superpower in having a usefulness for the people who hired me into the AP. I went on to cover the Battle of Tora Bora. I spent 2 years in Iraq, covering the conflict there, as well as doing a lot of other stuff, including working in Lebanon. You know, probably been into close to 60 countries. You know, that was my skill, and that is not necessarily a skill that Hearst is looking for, or that most newspapers are looking for today. And it's probably a skill that a lot of you guys don't want, and gals do not want to put to use. So when you're thinking about how am I going to set myself apart to that hiring manager, think about what languages do I speak? What computer languages do I speak? Am I a data reporter? Do I have great investigative skills? Can I demonstrate those skills? Because those are the things you're going to need to make that transition. Because, my bosses might get a little annoyed at me, and they often do, but there is a certain kind of suspicion I've encountered with some editors about, being a former military person. Am I the kind of person that's going to question authority? Am I the person that's willing to kind of challenge the status quo? And, I kind of had to prove that a little bit. And, as veterans or service members, that's an integral part of our identities, of what we do, but the civilian world doesn't know that. You're also going to be competing against a lot of really smart people who did get that journalism degree from a fancy school that maybe you didn't. So think about those ways you can set yourself apart. The next thing I would say is think about a job opening for me was always a problem I needed to solve. I would often pass over really good reporters because they didn't really kind of fit my team, because I was building a team of journalists and I wanted a variety of skills and perspectives and points of view that would be useful. I worked spent 14 years in Africa. I would need people with certain languages, with certain backgrounds, who could go into certain communities and do the reporting I needed. So if you don't get a callback, if you don't get called in for the interview, don't let that discourage you. Keep plugging at it. And when you're reading those job descriptions, read them very closely and make sure that you've got the right skills to fill that job. If it's a shotgun approach, is not going to work really well. And make sure if you're a writer, make sure you've got the clips. You've got the writing chops, because fundamentally journalism, in my experience, is a vocation. You need to be able to string sentences together and organize information effectively. And if you can do that, it doesn't matter what your degree is in or what your professional background is, because in writing, that's what they're looking for. Can you create a fabulous image that tells a story if you're a photographer? So hone your craft. You cannot spend enough time creating your skills or developing your skills in a way that they're really going to stand up and above and beyond the competition you're going to face. When you get the job, if you're prior service and you haven't worked in the civilian world yet, that's a difficult transition. It was a difficult transition for me. Journalism is very loose. It's not, you don't have as much structure. Your editors are not going to be paying as much attention to you, and they're not going to be coaching you as much, and you're going to have to show a lot more of that self-motivation and OJT and figuring it out on your own than what often the military has provided you in the past. So that, to me, is one of the big differences in making this move. Is it's a very different culture, and it's a much looser culture, and you're going to have to be ready to kind of stand on your own and be self-motivated and go out there and grab those stories, and again, work on your skills. Don't expect someone else to kind of wait on you or help you or be, your NCOIC is going to make sure that you succeed. And I know I'm probably making some of the higher ups cringe at this moment by speaking kind of on this practical level the way I would over beers. Probably shouldn't be saying all this on Zoom, but this is the stuff you need to be ready for. What is going to set you apart? And being a veteran is not enough. You're going to have the skills that the publication is going to need. And I think you'll find that, if you've got the skills, if you can write, if you can build a web page, if you can produce stories and produce images, you'll get their foot in the door, and then you'll have your opportunity to demonstrate your leadership skills, to demonstrate your self-motivation and your ability to work independently and efficiently and hit deadlines, because that's also a key part of this. And that's where your discipline as a veteran is going to make a huge difference. I hope that helps. It's not an easy transition. I'm not going to lie to you. And you're going to have to explain to your civilian bosses where you're coming from and what your work culture has been in the past, and get their buy-in to help you make that transition. But, I've been doing this for 25 years now as a journalist. And I love it, and I can't imagine doing anything else. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Levi.
Thank you. I'm on mute. I'm good now. Thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate all of that very helpful advice. And hopefully we'll have a chance to ask some more questions at the Q&A on that one. I'm going to go ahead and transition it to Carlos. Carlos is a staff photographer at the San Francisco Chronicle, and he's just going to talk about the role of photojournalism and how he's kind of gotten there. We're also going to show a little photo reel, so I'll stop sharing my screen once you're ready for that. So just let me know, but I'll let you talk for a bit.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks very much, Levi, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I've been at the Chronicle for 25 years now. I know it seems like a lifetime ago these days, when journalism jobs are coming and going. To have been at a place that you call home for 25 years is really a wonderful experience. And I grew up in the Bay Area, not too far from San Francisco, where I actually started my journalism career at the ripe age of about 8 years old, when I was delivering newspapers. But I also got a job at the local paper at my hometown when I was about 10. And that's where I caught the bug, the journalism, love of journalism, so to speak, where I was, being able to be in the newsroom and, kind of engage with the reporters and the people who made the paper happen. I was just a kid, but I loved to be around there, and they let me bundle newspapers for a couple hours a day. But I also got to see what was coming in from the other parts of the world. I was able to kind of watch the teletype and the old news feeds coming in, and really kind of understood the history of our town through my experiences there as a kid. And I really loved, being involved in it since then. I ended up, not studying journalism right away, but spent about 3 years studying engineering when I was done with high school, and started my college career. But then I kind of came back to understanding that journalism was a way of life for me. I picked up my camera again and started, studying at San Francisco State with the journalism department there, and fell in love all over again. And the nice thing about kind of coming back to community journalism and understanding what it means to cover your home and be involved in helping to, craft a narrative of what life is like in your home, is that I really applied that small journalism feel to everything that I do at the Chronicle. And the Chronicle gave me the launching point to then start doing it worldwide, where I could, be all over the world and tell stories that mattered to our community in different places in the world. I think one of the things that I loved was kind of going into foreign countries and being able to share the experiences there with the people back home. And in fact, started doing international stuff when I was still in college, covering the elections in El Salvador after the war there. And really understood that, the connection between people doesn't have to be just local and, county to county, city to city, state to state, but there are people who, have loved ones in other places, and that really want to know how those situations in other parts of the world are having an impact to them. And I think that's something that you've all experienced by being veterans and going out and wanting to do something that matters on an international level, or even different parts of the country here, to kind of really help to kind of keep things peaceful. And your missions are about keeping people together. And I think that's something that I really feel you guys have a leg up on a lot of young journalists, is that you have an understanding of those connections on a much larger scale. I have a few photos to show you guys and wanted to give you a quick run through of some of the stuff that we do, some of the stories that I've done. I was embedded in Iraq in 2006 during the war. And then also in 2009, did a quick trip to Afghanistan. You know, military stories are, you know, something that really don't get as much attention in some areas because, you know, we seem to see them on a macro scale rather than on the individual person and what's important for individual people. And I think the journalism that I like to do really focuses on people. And that's what the Chronicle has been really good to give me is they give me time to do stories that matter and stories that focus on individuals. So go ahead, Levi. I'm going to go ahead and switch over. Let me see here which one it is. Hopefully this one starts up right. So the Chronicle's been, you know, a great place for me to kind of tell stories of, you know.
Hey, Carlos.
Yes.
We're right now just looking at your slideshow settings. I don't know if you can reshare and just share your screen.
Hold on, let me get back to that.
As much as we're very interested in this slideshow settings, I think it'd be a little bit better to look at the photographs.
It actually just, I lost my mouse, so give me a second. Oops. And I'm going to go ahead and just do it manually. There we go. So like I was saying, the Chronicle's, you know, been a great place to, you know, touch on, you know, local stories, international stories, major pandemic stories. This was a picture I just took a couple of days ago about the reopening of the city after COVID-19. And, you know, part of what we do is kind of bring larger, you know, stories into focus on a local level. You know, we do a lot of things that sometimes are historical. You know, I'm very, you know, fond of doing large astronomical photos, projects that bring these major events into scale here locally. But also the stories that we tell are just, you know, a quick hit into kind of like daily life as well, which to me is super important to, you know, establish kind of a connection between readers and what's going on in smaller scale settings. I'm just going to go through these pretty quick so you kind of see some of the things that I've been working on.
And I'm so sorry again. Is anybody else having trouble seeing? All I'm seeing right now is just the Golden Gate Bridge.
Still? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me go back.
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Sure do love technology.
Let me try it. Let me do one thing real quick. See that one. Let's see, go back to that one. Let me try that one. Okay, so you still see this Golden Gate, right?
Yeah, okay, it's working now. Perfect.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, we were just stuck on the Golden Gate and I wasn't sure if you're still talking about it. So now it looks like it's working.
Sorry. Yeah, so I'll just do these manually, and I think it was just I got confused between windows. Technology is always our friend, and that's definitely one of the things we have to deal with on a daily basis is how much all this is changing from one moment to the next. But like I was saying about you know, seeing larger global issues kind of brought home, you know, the Chronicle's been really great about letting me kind of do larger historical photos, you know, that kind of I don't know. I guess they let me go out and do these bigger stories like the complete solar eclipse a couple of years ago, but also to do these stories that have an impact on our local communities. You know, everything is about finding connection and finding how people relate to each other, and little photos, details sometimes, you know, can do as much as a large scale photo of the full lunar eclipse. Our communities are very diverse here, and so we find, you know, even in sports arenas, they have some incredible, you know, moments where we can, you know, visually tell a story about how our communities are diverse and different. And, you know, it all comes down to, you know, sharing information, how people eat. I mean, food photography you wouldn't think is something that can be all that interesting, but I think that we really get an interesting look at, you know, different lifestyles through different kinds of food, and you know, and how do you do that artistically? That's the critical thing for me, is how do you find something that that can make, you know, something that we aren't familiar with appealing. We do a lot of celebrity photography, a lot of concerts, a lot of work that you know, for the Katy Perry fans. I mean, this is great. Mahershala Ali, Oscar-winning actor. We get to meet some interesting folks as well, but also just some interesting characters, you know, who we, you know, wouldn't ordinarily get to meet, like this gentleman who's an 85-year-old blacksmith in San Francisco. He's the last one in the city, and you know, he's now retired, so we won't be able to get to see that anymore. And I think that there are quiet stories that we can tell within these, you know, smaller frameworks that really help to make us more in touch with our communities. There's a huge homeless population in San Francisco, and I think one of the things, it's now a national story. We're seeing that all over the country, and I think it's important to talk about the issues that not just involve the homeless, but also smaller segments of that population, like the elderly. The drought is one of our biggest stories right now, and this is a photo I just took a couple of days ago about how farmers are not planting certain crops, or even, you know, certain fields to eliminate the need for water, because they just won't be allotted as much. And all these issues are you know, very germane to the state as a whole, the country as a whole, because California has a huge part in producing food for the rest of the nation. And you know, and if they can't do that, then you know, everything's going to go up. The one of the fun things about the job is I get to do some interesting history, I guess you could say. That, you know, you see the Bay Bridge and the space shuttle riding piggyback on the back of a 747, and you know, it's like, when I was a kid, I never would have imagined being able to kind of be involved in making photos that had a historical context like that. This was a photo that I took on the night of the shutdown of I think it was the state, where, you know, because of COVID-19, the whole state had to shut down. And this is the night at midnight, just after midnight, when the last car coming across the Bay Bridge was rolling into a city that was basically shutting down. And I felt this photo really made an impact on that story. We cover a lot of breaking news, a lot of stories that end up having deeper impact. And you know, this was you know, a dam, I guess, in Oroville that was almost about to collapse, and the people that were ultimately affected by it. Breaking news is something that's really critical, and I think one of the things that you all bring to it as veterans is you have really incredible skills in terms of crisis management and being able to get information out quickly and be able to, you know, share that quickly. And I think it's really important to have that skill set. In other, you know, in other areas, we just do stories that really matter on a quiet level. You know, how do certain people, you know, get through the pandemic? And this young man was not an orphan per se, but he was homeless, and he had been abandoned by his dad. And he was, you know, we spent a year following the class of 2020 and how they managed to get through the pandemic on his own. So stories like that really, you know, kind of bring people a deeper understanding of the issues of, you know, the pandemic, but also being, you know, alone and homeless and that kind of thing. And I think it really helps us to kind of create better bonds with each other. I do a lot of stories based on drought. I mean, it's just such a prevalent topic these days. And I think that this is now becoming an issue up in Oregon, where they're threatening to open up the Klamath Falls watershed because there's not enough water coming down into the area. And naturally, the day they sent me up, it was raining. But you know, it really tells you a lot about the farming when they shut down part of the fields, and they literally just stopped plowing right in the middle of the season. They just stopped. So one of the other things that I do a lot of is sports for the paper, and I tend to do a lot more technical sports photography, like setting up remotes and special wiring, and you know, looking at different ways to show pictures and that kind of, or see from a different perspective. And that includes a lot of drone photography, technology, very long lenses. but again, it all comes down to capturing the right moment and finding the right thing to share with people. Let's see, I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly because I know I'm running out of time, right, Levi? So I'm sure you recognize a lot of these guys. The championship warriors, we had 5 great years of them running, the championships, NBA finals, and covered a lot of that. Did a lot of work with some of the local sports teams to be able to have special access and that kind of thing, and having the technology to be able to rig these special remotes and lights and that kind of thing. And I guess, it's like, it's just one of my specialties is I'm able to get in there and work with people and have a great communication with the organizations that run this and have a lot of great access. And that's, a lot of it is just being able to, form good relationships with people and work with organizations that are able to give us the time. And, I think a lot of what I do is thinking ahead and kind of pre-planning stories and finding ways to kind of, see how that impact is going to, come out on the back end. And one of the stories that I did that I really still feel, has been the most impactful for me was a story on Dr. Frank Artris in Africa, Tanzania. He was a doctor who we found, about 10 years ago, who was going and doing clinics in the bush to take care of, villagers out in the middle of Tanzania near Arusha. And, I think that his work really made me realize that there's something that I wanted to do in terms of being a journalist that would help other people. And it's not just about the sports, it's not just about, kind of having my name under the picture, but it's about what the kind of impact that I could have out there in the real world. And Dr. Frank was somebody who almost died climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. He decided to stay and help the people when they actually rescued him. And he was beginning to have a clinic, build a clinic for the people in the area. And, because of the work that we did, the story that we told, he was able to fundraise, and now he has a full hospital and a teaching environment for other doctors, Tanzanian doctors. He was, initially just the only Western doctor in a population of about 200,000 in an area that had about 200,000 people. So the impact of the work we did really, really manifested itself in the success of his ability to build on that. And his work was, incredibly important. I've done stories in Nepal about also just after that 10 years ago. Stories about how a woman from locally here who was fighting a system of child slavery. It was a cultural, established system of, the families who were poor would sell off their daughters. And it was, when we did the story on this woman's organization that helped to stop that, ultimately a few years later, the practice was banned by Nepal. So, the stories that we did helped to kind of bring, some change that was much needed. And I really want to encourage you, because you all got into the service to make something better, to do something that helps other people. The journalism, you can tell the stories that matter are out there, and they don't all have to be here local. They don't all have to be in your small community or your small town, or even, in your large city. You can actually do stories that have an impact on a global scale. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, is that, everywhere you go and everything, every story you tell has an impact. And I think that's
Thank you so much. We very much appreciate that, Carlos. So it was really cool for me personally to be able to see all of that. I wish we could spend more time going through that, but we do need to continue this show. So thank you again. So I'm going to quickly send it over to Jess. She's the director of audience at the San Francisco Chronicle. I don't want to say that we're running low on time, but we're running low on time. So I'll give this to you. And
I'll try to go quickly.
Yes, I appreciate it.
So first, yeah, my background here is actually Carlos's photograph. Probably one of the images from that time period where we got the most, impressions on Instagram. It was just an image that was everywhere. I'm Jess. I'm the director of audience here at the Chronicle. I've been with the Chronicle since January of 2020. Was there in the newsroom for about 2 months before we all had to shelter in place. But in terms of, how I think about this role and how I think about audience work in general, whenever I find myself talking about this to people on my team or to people who are considering it, I always have to remind myself and try to, tell them and remind them that this job really didn't exist 10 years ago, maybe didn't even quite exist 5 years ago. So this entire, not just audience, but the entire digital newsroom is really evolving rapidly. And I'd say this is, audience work is one area that's especially changing day to day, month to month, depending, and might be really different depending on which newsroom you're in right now. So one of the things that I love about my job at the Chronicle, and the thing that I love about the vision for this team, when it was put in place by leadership and by Tim O'Rourke, who I think is on the call right now and will be around for Q&A later, but the vision for this team was that it wasn't just going to be about audience analytics or just about social media or sitting off in one corner of the newsroom, that this would be a team that would have editors and strategists and also reporters on it. And so we would lead by example and make decisions really driven by our digital audience and their needs, and that we could become fully integrated into the newsroom and eventually, that what we do could happen on all teams across the newsroom in different ways. So being digital first it's not just a strategy for us at the Chronicle, and I would say this is true for all of Hearst. It's an imperative for survival. Though I think we still have a very strong print readership. I think all of the Hearst papers do. We know that those numbers are shrinking and that the growth in our audience from here on out is going to come from digital subscriptions. So, and this is true, I'd say, across the board for media. We've totally reworked the structure of our newsroom at every level and across every team over the years. So, this process was started years ago, but that work still continues today. And it means not just creating roles that focus on digital, but redefining all of the roles across the room, from a photojournalist to a reporter to an editor to a designer, to make sure that everyone is really focused on digital, even when that might mean sacrificing some things for print. My team, we do many different things. I have an audience editor who works on social media strategy and search optimization strategy. I have a newsletter editor, and there's a team of reporters and editors, like I said, who are entirely focused on engaging our audience through telling the story of the moment. So that might be breaking news, that might be trending news, utility journalism. 2020, it felt like it was a constant. The story of the moment wasn't exactly, obviously it was coronavirus, but there was also protests, there was an election, there was a historic fire season in California. So we participated and helped and collaborated on all of those stories in 2020 and helped the newsroom kind of, what we like to say, swarm those stories. So my team also does use audience analytics to come up with insights for the newsroom that can help them make decisions about what to cover, what not to cover, and those kinds of things. And the role of audience analytics really, in my opinion, is not just to sort of look at the numbers and present the numbers, but to digest them into insights for people who may not care to or may not have it in their skill set to really dive into analytics in the way that we do. So what unites sort of all the folks on my team, and increasingly is starting to be a skill that's important across the room, is to be able to take those insights and act on them, to be driven by data in our decision making, and to really consider our readers first when we're thinking about what we're doing. So in terms of the skills needed to be a digitally focused journalist in 2021, there's so many. I mean, we ask our reporters to take cameras with them to be able to record audio and capture video and all of those sort of specific things that I think have been kind of on the table for a while now. One of the things that I think might sometimes get overlooked in terms of digital skills is really just on a basic level, understanding how our readers read today. How do they read? How do they get to news? How do they get to longer stories? How do people get to our journalism? So the legacy of print is that so many journalists, I think for so long, thought of that process as being opening up a newspaper or a magazine or whatever, and sort of just sitting there and reading, and you sort of had them as this captive audience. We know that today that's absolutely not the case for our digital readers. And what we know is that there is no one way of reading on digital. There are people who might sit down at the end of the day with their computer or their iPad and dive in for a long form read. And then there are the people who are on their phones all day long. It's what it really is about is understanding that the way that we approach this has to be different for every reader in some ways. It has to be platform specific, and we really need to be focused on reaching people wherever they are. So I think that the editors, reporters, and journalists who sort of understand that and try to develop that sense in them as a skill and figure out how that informs what they do and how they work with people around the room, I think that's a great thing. The other thing that I would say on digital skills is when it comes to analytics, I love to talk to reporters, especially, but editors too, about how they use analytics in their work, because everyone's different on this. Everyone's a little different. Everyone has different preferences or gets sort of motivated in different ways by analytics. But I think I love hearing all those different strategies, and I love talking to people who have actively tried to make it a skill, something that, you know, they practice. How do I look at these analytics? How do I make sense of them? What questions should I ask? Should I go to the audience team and ask them what this means? So when I talk to people who are actively trying to, you know, turn that into a skill that they use to either motivate themselves or to make decisions, I love hearing that. So I think that the need for those skills in all journalists is really pressing today as we try to grow our digital readership in a time where, you know, where there's so many competitors out there, so many journalism organizations doing amazing work. And when our readers are so pressed for time, they have so many things going on in their lives and so many distractions. And so to capture even just 10 minutes of our readers' time can be a huge challenge for us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you're good. No, that was great. I really appreciate it. And you'll have more chance to talk during but really appreciate that. That was very helpful. And I think it's a total shift in how we think about newspapers, but a good shift, right? So now we're going to move into our Q&A session. And I don't know that everybody on this screen here is with us right now, but Wendy, I'm going to kick it off to you. And maybe what we can do, since there is a smaller group with us, is if you want to prioritize maybe the people who might want to speak over the mic, and then use the questions that are submitted if nobody has anything. So I'm going to hand it off to you, but go ahead right away.
Okay, that sounds great. So we've had the benefit of getting questions in advance, and then I picked up some additional ones on the chat. So we'll start with one of the questions that we had previously, which is mostly around how to find a foothold in journalism. Maybe when you've come from public affairs type reporting or the military, as some people in this group have, you know, what would we suggest is a good place to start? And I wonder if Chris can maybe take that question, if Chris is still with us.
Sure. You know, that public affairs writing that you were doing, or that work that you did for the Division magazine, that's probably not going to be a good clip you want to submit to a news organization. I mean, you can, if it's beautifully photographed, yes. If it's got a great layout in digital, sure. But, you know, read what you see in newspapers. You know, look at the front pages of the publication you're trying to get a job at, and see what do they write about, what is important to them. Get a sense of their style, and you'll notice it's not the public affairs style. It's more journalistic, it's more hard-hitting. It's frequently a kind of a sharper narrative than what your commanding officer probably would have signed off on while you're on active duty. So one of the questions I saw in the chat was, how can I become a better writer? And the answer is simple: you just have to write a lot. When I was first starting out, I used to rewrite stories I found in the newspaper. I would take those basic facts and think, how can I write this in a more compelling way? And kind of work on that. And don't be afraid to start out at a small publication and covering what you think is an insignificant beat like City Hall or the school board at a small town paper, and just write the hell out of those stories. Just do a really super job, because oftentimes those organizations are the minor league teams that the big metros will pick from for a promotion later on. So yeah, just think about think about not what you've done, but what the newspaper or the publication needs you to be able to do.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for that. Maria, I might ask you to answer two questions. We had the fellowship question earlier, which might be a benefit to the group to answer. You know, right now I know we're more focused on like reporting, but we have had some fellowships with regard to the Dev Hub. But also I wondered in the same breath, if you could talk a little bit about what value does life experience bring into the role? And I know that's something that we look at during the fellowships, getting to know the person and the experience they bring and how authentic that can make the journalism. But that was one of the submitted questions as well. So could you take those two, please?
So unfortunately, Maria actually just left us because she's going to go and watch a presentation with her daughter. But Renee, I don't know if you could speak to that. I know I see you on here, or at least part of that.
Sure. I'm sorry. I was multitasking. What would you like me to talk about?
And don't worry, I can also help with them. But Renee, one of the things was about the fellowship. You know how we've broadened it a little. We were looking for reporters, but then we've also had the Dev Hub, new opportunities. So one of the questions asked to Maria earlier on chat was, you know, can we develop producer type skills? And even if that's not a role we have now, is it something that we're open to? So if you take that one, I can take the other.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, right now, you know, traditionally the fellowship program was for, you know, reporter journalists. We expanded it 2 years ago to add one fellow a year on our developer side. So we have a developer fellow. So, you know, we've got a framework with which we're working in, but we can always look at other avenues as, you know, kind of the journalism landscape changes. So, you know, I always say, you know, if you're interested in applying, you know, to our fellowship program, when you know, when the applications open up again, feel free to apply.
Yeah, that's great. And then the other one was something that does come up in fellowship interviews as well. You know, everybody brings their own life experience, and how does that help them in an interview process? And what I would say about that is certainly we see it with fellows. You may not have a bunch of experience. You might have some clips. You might have had an internship. And I strongly encourage you to put all your efforts into any freelance you can do an internship experience, because that's how you can write award-winning work. But equally, it's as much about your passion and what drives you and experiences that you've had, like Carlos talking about, you know, Iraq and things like that. You know, what have you learned as a human being? Because surely that drives a lot of, you know, what drives a journalist. So Renee, I don't know if you had any further thoughts on that.
No, I think you're right. It's, you know, what your life and your experience have brought you to this part in your journey, and that's come through in our interviews for sure for the fellowship program.
The other thing that we've really been looking at is, you know, increasing our networks and pipelines. And Michael Bolden is here. And I think, Michael, it would have been wonderful even just to give you 15 minutes to talk about all your experience in this space. But I wonder if I could maybe put you on the spot here just to talk a little bit about your observations of the conversation so far and any advice you might offer to potential candidates that are on the call with us.
Thanks, Wendy. I mean, one of the things that amazes me, and I realize that, you know, coming from the military, you might be at a disadvantage not knowing about some of the networks and other organizations that can serve as pathways into news organizations. But I think the best advice is to be a reporter and to hone those skills, just learning what you can about organizations like Hearst, or specifically, you know, the San Francisco Chronicle or the Houston Chronicle or San Antonio, whatever it is, and bird dogging those organizations, bird dogging the local journalism organizations. I mean, you know, there is a SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists chapter in most of those cities. There are press clubs in most of those cities. Send inquiries to people who are at those organizations and ask, because I know I'm constantly on the lookout for people just to talk with them about their careers and potential pathways. One of the things that I think that is critical for anybody who's going into this business today is to be adaptable. So I like to be surprised sometimes when I'm looking for talent and when I'm meeting people, and to actually encourage people. So don't be afraid to drop the note and to introduce yourself and to just ask people for 5 or 10 minutes of their time. I think you'd be surprised at the response that you would get, and how willing people are to just sort of share their experience with you and to point you in some directions that you might not have thought of.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michael. Tim, I might call on you as well. Tim is just a fantastic leader in this space. And when it comes to some of the work that Jess was talking about, interactives, digital, etc. But Tim, maybe you could comment a little, for this group, what can they do to stand out in the hundreds of applications that you get? What are you looking for?
Hey, Wendy, thanks. Yeah, I want to echo what Michael Bolden said about, the reporting really kind of serving as a great foundation for any job in a newsroom. I've worked a ton of jobs. The reporting was at the core of my skill set. And then, I've branched out from there. And a lot of the folks who work for me have branched out from there. I've done a lot of hiring in the past couple of years in spaces like development, interactive producing, audio hosting, data journalism. And a lot of these, almost all of them have come from like a traditional text-based journalism reporting background. And then they've kind of built their skills into more specialized areas and topics that have allowed them to more easily find a job. And I think that's super important these days because there are different kinds of ways to tell stories, and the industry is always changing, and our readers and listeners' habits are always changing. So anytime you get the opportunity to combine real basic, strong journalistic principles with innovative storytelling skills, whether it be through investigative work, whether it be through data reporting, audio skills, site producing, or website or development or project interactives, all that is something that's going to help you stand out, and it's going to get you a job, much, much quicker.
That's great, Tim. Thanks so much. I think we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to put this one to Brendan. What does it take to be a strong reporter? How would you sort of maybe choose a few things that you really have to excel at to shine in this space?
I think that it's important, to be courageous, but also to be fair, in this business. But what I value too, and we've been doing a lot of hiring on our teams, and I would say to you military veterans there, that real life experience is something that can't be matched. There are, I liken it sometimes, the journalism graduates that we get to the state trooper who goes through the academy and is at the top of his class. He can shoot like a marksman. He can do 100 push-ups. But when he gets on the highway, he's afraid to pull someone over. And that really happens. And I think that that your real life experience is something that don't discredit that. Don't think that, because maybe your writing isn't up to snuff or something else is lacking, that the other strengths that you bring, that world experience and, just the experience of going through the military and all of the things that you've gone through in your life become part of what makes a great job candidate.
That's great. And Alexia, I see you're here too, maybe from a politics reporting point of view. There couldn't be a busier beat, arguably. What do you think it takes to succeed from a reporter's view in this industry?
So do you mean specifically on the political side of things, or?
You can start there and speak generally, whatever you like.
Yeah, well, I echo many of the things that people have already said about sort of trying to break in by, starting in smaller places and sort of building up your skill set there and telling the best stories you can there. The first job doesn't have to be the dream job. It doesn't have to be, the thing that you always wanted to do. I mean, this is a building process, as any career is. And a lot of times, actually focusing on those kinds of stories and beats and locations that other people aren't, allows you to distinguish yourself because they might not be getting the attention they deserve. And that could allow you to really stand out by telling important stories that other people haven't. So I think, you know, no matter where it is that you end up or start, there are, you know, so many good stories out there that you can find and start building those clips, building those skills. You know, I think in terms of the political, you know, I think people are looking for more people now who have different kinds of perspectives and experience, life experiences, particularly in the political reporting space, which has been dominated for a long time by, you know, reporters who maybe come out of the same schools and programs and backgrounds. And so if that is something you're interested in, having, for example, the military experience or anything else that you think really distinguishes you in your background, you know, use that to sell sort of what different perspective could you bring to the type of political issues we cover and how. You know, as several people on this call have stated, you know, we need to speak to a wider audience than we have been in terms of our coverage. And so it's really valuable to have a different perspective that you can bring to the way that we frame a lot of these stories that we're covering. I mean, I'm in California, I'm covering state politics, not national politics, but, you know, I think it goes the same for politics at every level, that, you know, new and different perspectives of, you know, of background and life experiences are really valuable for telling those political stories that haven't gotten enough attention.
That's fantastic. What a great perspective and good advice for everybody on the call. Well, hopefully we answered some of your questions. I'm sure we didn't get to all of them. I would be more than happy if anyone wants to reach out and email me. I can navigate through this wonderful group and get you any answers that we didn't get to, but thanks to everybody for participating.
Awesome. Okay, well, that was great. We are running a bit short on time, but I think that was really valuable. So we'll do a quick little breakout activity, and basically you'll get paired up with a newspaper employee, and, you know, feel free to ask questions, try to think about, you know, the role, that type of thing. And yeah, so there's some instructions there, and probably we'll have chance for 1 or 2 questions. So I'll put everybody in breakout rooms. I've got everybody split up already so that there's a good even mix of people. And then this is kind of just, you know, normally it'd be 15 minutes. We're going to do it in 10 minutes, and I'll pull everybody back right at 6. So it'll be quick, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't share contact information, schedule those calls, whatever it makes sense for you. And just keep in mind that some of them that you'll be paired up with don't necessarily have a specific role in the hiring process. So I'm going to go ahead and open up all the rooms. So you just go ahead and accept it, and then we'll go from there.